Hi there. I'm Frank Gerard, audiobook narrator for the wonderful book, Jim Reeves. I've narrated over 150 audiobooks, and this was far and away the most enjoyable book I've ever recorded in my life. And I am honored to have with me here the author of the book, Jim Reeves, and I'm not getting the entire title right. Maybe, Larry, you could hold it up for the audience here.
Okay.
Um, Jim Reeves, His Untold Story. But I just knew it as Jim Reeves because I narrated this wonderful 40-hour audiobook, the longest book I've ever narrated by far. But I'm honored to have with me the author of the book, Jim Reeves, His Untold Story, Larry Jordan. Larry, how the heck are you?
I'm very well, thank you. It's good to be with you, Frank.
You too. So I have to ask you this. Like I said, I've never ever read or narrated a book with so much detail. I mean, everything from details about Jim's hair or lack thereof, everything from every detail of everywhere Jim was just about every day in his life. So I have to ask you, how did you get started on this and why Jim Reeves?
Well, how much time do you have? It's a very long story, 5 or 6 hours at least.
Maybe, maybe,
I'll
maybe distill
condense
it
it.
down to 10 minutes if you can or less.
Well, I'm a baby boomer.
Yeah.
And so as I was growing up, Jim was launching his career. And although, of course, I was quite young when he started, I still have some vivid memories. For example, one of my early memories of Jim was of him performing on the Lawrence Welk Show, which is a program that my parents and many other families
Yeah.
watched faithfully every week. And I can still picture Jim on that show. He was wearing a sweater. The camera was up a little bit higher than he was, I think because he had a tendency to tilt his head back when he sang. I even remember that he had his hands folded in front of him, and he sang the song Anna Marie, the Cindy Walker song. And I found out later that the reason he did that, it was one of Lawrence Welk's favorites. So Mr. Welk specifically asked Jim to do that song. A
Oh,
little aside to this is I got to know Lawrence Welk over the years. That's another story. But I had a good relationship with the Welk offices. And in more recent years, I had contacted them to ask if they could find a copy of the kinescope of that broadcast where Jim appeared on the Lawrence Welk Show. And they said, yes, we maintain a file of everything that Welk had ever done. So they went to their storeroom and called me with the sad news that when they picked up the canister that was supposed to contain that kinescope, it was empty. So someone, somewhere along the line, absconded with that historic film containing Jim's performance on the Lawrence Welk Show. And I
hmm.
can guess it was one of the hoarders out there that collect them, they're like a black hole, nothing ever comes out. But be that as it may, I remember him on the Lawrence Welk Show. Another program I saw Jim on when I was young was a program that was hosted by Jimmy Dean. And I'm not talking about the 1964 program that fans are familiar with. Jimmy had a show originating from Washington, D.C. in the morning. It was like in 57 and 58.
Was that Town and
And
Country Time?
it was, yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was a 45-minute program early in the morning. I could see it sometimes before I watched Captain Kangaroo and went to school. And Jim was on that program. But then in 58 and into 59, um, Jimmy Dean had a show named after himself. And it was on 5 weekdays, every day for the weekdays, and also on Saturday. And it was an afternoon show, also carried on CBS. So these were opportunities for me, our entire family, to see Jim Reeves. I'll never forget one time on Jimmy Dean's show. There was some young man, I don't remember who it was, that had just sung a song, and the camera switched back to Jim and Jimmy Dean standing there. And they were talking about the young man that had just performed. And Jimmy Dean said something I've never forgotten. It was kind of an odd comment. He said, Jim, did you notice when that guy was singing, he never raised his shoulders when he was taking those deep breaths while he was singing. They were commenting on the skill with which this young man performed, and Jim kind of chuckled and agreed with that, you know. Another program that I remember watching was from Springfield, Missouri, the Ozark Jubilee. And fans can actually see some of Jim's performances on that show on YouTube. They're from Kinescope, so the video quality is not really great.
Was
That
that
was immensely,
Red Foley's show?
yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
got it.
And Red Foley was off in the summer of '58 for health reasons, and Jim was tapped to be the summer replacement. And those are very interesting. I find it intriguing that Jim was quite a natural in front of the camera in the earlier part of his career. However, for some inexplicable reason I've never figured out, as his career progressed and he became more comfortable, oddly enough, from having performed on stages all around the world, I thought he got more awkward in front of the camera. I don't know why that was.
Hmm.
But anyway, one big thing that was significant in my understanding of Jim and appreciation for him was that my dad paid quite a bit of money actually to buy a portable radio with a big antenna. And he did that specifically so we could listen to the broadcasts of the Grand Ole Opry on Saturday night. I vividly remember that. And Jim became our favorite whenever he came on. Now, WSM to this day is still a clear channel station, 50,000 watts, which means there's no other station in America that operates on that frequency of 650 kilocycles.
Right.
And at night, the radio signal bounces off of the ionosphere and can travel great distances. So whereas you wouldn't be able to tune in, for example, during the day, we live 650 miles from Nashville, we could hear it after the sun went down. So with our fancy new radio, we would be able to listen to that. So that was a terrific opportunity to really gain appreciation for Jim's voice. Now, there was kind of a turning point. In July of 1964, our family went to Colorado on vacation. And when we returned, my mother was going through the newspapers that had accumulated in our absence. And I can still picture this scene as if it just happened. I was sitting on the floor in our living room, and she was going through newspapers. She had one open, and she said, "Oh no!" And I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "Jim Reeves died." And I said, "What happened?" It was a little 3-inch item buried in the back of the Cedar Rapids, Iowa Gazette.
That's all it
That's all
was.
he was
Hmm.
worth, I
Wow.
guess. But we were very, very disheartened to hear that. The next year, in October of '65, at the CMA Awards, Mary Reeves accepted 3 different awards for Jim. And I also remember my mother's comment in that regard as we watched Mary Reeves go up to the stage, and Roy Acuff presented one of the awards. And my mom said, "You know, she's a pretty little gal," upon seeing Mary Reeves. I told Mary that when I got to know Mary Reeves. And I'm always thankful that one day, years later, I was able to introduce my mother to Mary at the museum, the gift shop at the Jim Reeves Museum in
So
Nashville.
hold on a minute. I sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah,
So take me from this time in 1965 when you saw Mary
mhm,
Reeves accepting the award and your mother
right.
said she was a pretty little thing. Fast forward to how did you meet Mary Reeves and how old were you and how did that happen?
Okay, I will tell you exactly. In
Okay.
'65 for Christmas, my parents got our family a console stereo. It wasn't a very elaborate thing, a fairly simple cabinet. It was up on legs, had a lid, had a turntable. And the first album and only album that we had at Christmas was The Best of Jim Reeves, Volume 1. You know, the one with the orange cover, if you've ever
Yeah,
seen
I
that,
could picture it, right?
very
Yeah.
famous picture. And that's all we had. And I used to like to lay on the floor underneath the stereo with the speakers up above me and listen to that resonant voice coming out of those speakers. My dad was a big fan also. I would come home from school. I remember one time he was sitting in this little room where we had the stereo, and he was just sitting there in the afternoon listening to Jim. His favorite song was According to My Heart, which I have to confess, in all honesty, is not one of my favorites.
Mm,
And I told that to Mary Reeves one time, and she laughed and she said, "You know, I've never liked that song.
and
There's
that's
nothing wrong with that song, but I don't
okay.
know why. I just don't like that song."
Yeah.
The gentleman that wrote it, the composer that wrote it, was actually a good friend of theirs. And Mary and Jim, when they'd be in New York, would dine at a steakhouse with this composer. But anyway, so I became familiar. And I also had bought an album of various country music artists. And inside was a very informative little booklet with a biographical sketch on each of the artists and a photo. And it raised more questions than it answered. So, with the encouragement of my dad, I sent a letter, a rather lengthy letter to RCA. And to my surprise, I received a reply from Chet Atkins, who gave me Mary Reeves's address, Drawer 1, Madison, Tennessee. And so I wrote her. To my surprise, on September 12th of 1966, which was a Monday, I received this very long letter from Mary. I
Wow.
know she personally typed it because no self-respecting secretary would ever send out a letter like this, because the type written text went off into the margins. There were typos, things were crossed out. It was kind of sloppy, actually. But I knew that Mary had genuinely taken the time to sit down and write that letter.
Yeah.
And I remember my dad, when I got the mail, I'd come home from school, got the mail, opened up this letter. I couldn't wait to show my father. He had been taking a nap. He was still working at that time, a bus driver. And I woke him up and said, Mary Reeves wrote me. And we laid there in the bed. He was so impressed reading this letter to see that the widow of a famous international singing star would take the time to answer this multitude of questions from
Yeah.
a young boy from Iowa.
It's
That was
amazing.
on Monday. On Wednesday, my father passed away.
Oh, so
And
sorry.
I wrote Mary to tell her that I was glad that he had lived long enough to have read her letter.
Right.
And this must have touched her heart because we began writing back and forth nearly every other week. And one night, a year or two later, I heard Mary as a guest on the overnight Ralph Emery show on WSM. Tex Ritter was also on that show.
Mm.
So I brazenly called up, I found the number, called directory assistance, called the number for
Good for
WSM,
you.
somehow got in.
How old are you? Like roughly how old?
Well, I was about 15 at that point.
Wow. Amazing. Okay.
And I managed to get a hold of Ralph Emery in the studio. And I said, "May I speak with Mary?" While he was playing a record. And so he put Mary on the line. And I got my first chance to talk to Mary. And at that time, she said, "Why don't you come down and see me?" And she meant that literally. And she and my
Yeah.
mother corresponded. So when I was about 15, I was put on a Greyhound bus with a YWCA tour group of little old ladies, and I rode 650 miles down to Nashville. One of the most arduous trips I've ever taken, traveled by Greyhound 650 miles. It was hot and everything.
And you were 15.
15.
Okay.
And I stayed with the ladies. I think it might have been the Hermitage. It was a very old hotel. I
Hmm.
got stuck in the elevator at one point. I remember that story. But there was a radio station in the lobby of the hotel, and they had glass windows like radio stations did. And I rapped on the window and I motioned to the DJ on duty that I wanted to come in and talk to him. He opened the door and I said, "I brought my tape recorder, my reel to reel tape recorder that I borrowed from my church in Cedar Rapids with me on the trip." I said, "Is there any way of getting backstage at the Opry?" He picked up the phone and, believe it or not, called the manager of WSM at home and handed the phone to me. And I explained what I wanted to do. And the gentleman said, "Yes, just go down and enter through the alley entrance on the side." It was actually between the Ryman and Tootsie's. And he said, "Just ask for Ott Divine." Now, that was the guy that was kind
Oh,
of the
yeah.
doorman,
Right.
older, distinguished gentleman. When I arrived and gave my name, I was treated like royalty. I was escorted to the dressing room, the small dressing room for the men. I set up my tape recorder there. I interviewed a whole bunch of stars, including a young Dolly Parton, who was
Wow.
very kind. And I thought to myself, poor girl, she's never going to go anywhere in this business because she's so nervous. She was trembling the entire time I was interviewing her. So that
Great.
was on Saturday. Then I saw the show also, of course, from backstage, which is a terrific thrill. Sometime I have to tell you about the time that Elvis visited backstage on the other side of the stage on one of my other trips down there.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
anyway, on Sunday, it had been prearranged that Mary would pick me up in Jim's Cadillac. She had not been driving the Cadillac, his 1960 Cadillac.
Wow.
Very, really a boat, as they call it, a huge,
Yeah. Yeah.
beautiful car, Carrera green, the white top. James Newberry restored it for over $100,000 when he acquired it. You can still
Hmm.
find pictures of it online. But I had the honor of riding in it. Mary had it in storage, but she had it serviced, she told me, to get it running because she thought I would enjoy riding around in it. Now, why this woman accorded me so much consideration, she treated me like royalty, chauffeured me around Nashville. We went to the newly opened Country Music Hall of Fame, which opened, by the way, in 1967. So you can kind of get an idea of the time
Yeah.
frame here. That's that church steeple shaped building that
Hmm.
still exists, but it's used for another purpose. I walked in with Mary Reeves. The place was full of fans. And to my astonishment, people recognized Mary Reeves
Hmm.
as if she was a celebrity. It might have been because they'd seen her on the ABC broadcast, a year or two before,
You're
and
right.
she had appeared accepting all those awards. We were mobbed. We were just surrounded by all these autograph seekers. And some of them were the ladies from my tour group from Iowa. And some of them were a little bit pushy. And I apologized to Mary later about it. And she just shrugged it off and laughed. Mary had the most musical laugh and could laugh at anything. She was so easygoing, but very professional. And she said, "Oh, don't apologize for them. I enjoy doing them." So anyway, and we went to dinner and also went to the RC building, the one that they broke ground for on July 31st, 1964. It was adjacent to Studio B, just a much larger facility, larger studio. Jim Reeves had accepted an invitation to be at the groundbreaking, thinking he was the only star that would be there with other RCA dignitaries from New York. When he found out that they'd invited a whole bunch of stars, he decided to go to Batesville, Arkansas instead. If he had only attended that ceremony, things might have been different. But anyway,
Right.
on that Sunday afternoon, Mary did also take me to her two room suite of offices at the RC building. I set up my recorder and I recorded an hour-long interview. I still have the tape.
Do
I
you?
was able to transcribe it and also use some of her quotations in my book this many years later. When I got home, that tape I produced for a local radio station, KHAK, and on a Sunday afternoon, I presented the Jim Reeves story. So over the
Wow.
years, I ended up knowing Mary for 33 years. I made multiple trips down there, even as a teenager, hopping on Ozark Airlines and flying down there to see her. I can tell you lots of stories about things involving
Hmm.
that. I was a guest in the Reeves home. Mary had a prohibition against people taking pictures of the home, but I was the exception. She knew I had my camera with me,
Hmm.
so she let me snap pictures all around. I remember particularly the display case in their rec room, a custom built display case that not only had Jim's record awards, but also had his collection of mechanical toys that he was very fond of.
Wow.
So that was really kind of my introduction. And of course, the rest is history. Multiple trips down there. Mary even made a trip to Iowa in 1974. She was invited up by WHO, another 50,000 watt station. So she came to Des Moines on the anniversary of Jim's passing, and I hung out with her for 3 days in Des Moines. So we just kept in touch. I would call her. On my blog, I actually have an audio clip of our conversation. When I was
Now
doing,
just yeah, now
yeah, go
just
ahead.
just in these last 10 to 12 minutes, there are probably 10 or 15 little nuggets that you've said that I am thinking this is going to be the subject of a future uh, I don't know what we're calling these yet, podcasts or video blog or whatever, because you're a wealth of knowledge with this stuff. And by the way, for those of you watching this, Larry and I just decided to do this in the last week. We're not sure what form it's going to take, but what we'd like to do is every 3 or 4 weeks come out with a new Jim Reeves video, just talking about the book and a lot of the things Larry has been involved in. And maybe eventually this will become a bigger talk about a bigger get together where we talk about different forms of old classic country music. But to wrap this one up, Larry, tell me then, when did you start the book?
Well, I can actually backdate it. It came out in 2011, and it took me
Okay.
13 years to write.
Yeah.
So whatever year that was, that's when I
Okay.
started the book.
So you started it in 2006, 2007,
I
something
think
like
that
that,
must have been it.
2008. Okay.
One of the smartest things I did at the suggestion of my wife, Julie, was somebody had started a website that was not very complimentary to Jim. And she said, well, we can do that. So we did. And I promoted the fact that I was going to work on a book on Jim Reeves. And as a result, I got contributions from all over the world, people who had had an encounter with Jim. And it just built and built and built. I also have to give a shout out to Ron McBride, my steadfast friend, who would use lunch hours from his job to go to his local library in Kansas and look up things on the interlibrary loan as we constructed the timeline of Jim's life, which was critical. It was the framework for my being able to write the narrative of this book. People asked, well, why did you include all these show dates? And actually, I left some of them out. The reason was I kept getting bombarded by fans saying, did Jim ever come to, my Tucson, Arizona or whatever? They really wanted to know.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Something just happened. I'm not sure if we stopped
I'm just sharing the website with our viewers. I'm not sure
Okay.
if it worked. And the website, by the way, for those of you watching, and it's a great website, jim-reeves.com. And that's, by the way, the first time I ever came in contact with Larry was probably 25 years ago. You may not even know this, but I went to your website, jim-reeves.com, and I was just amazed and blown away by it. And you can read it forever. It just goes on and on and on. So the first website I want to give our viewers out there, if you haven't been to it yet, or you may be on it right now, is go to jim-reeves.com. You will be on it forever because it is a treasure trove of information. And Larry was the internet before the internet was cool, folks. I mean, this was like way ahead of its time. So, all right, so continue, Larry. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say the fan forum that's on that
Yes.
website is a good place. There's a hardcore little group of devotees who don't like Facebook. I have several Facebook pages that people can peruse also, but they like that fan forum, and that's their own little forum. Anybody's welcome to join that and ask questions. And I
Yeah.
was going to suggest to you also that they could go on that site or any of the Facebook pages that I operate. It's pretty clear which ones are mine and submit questions for future
Sure.
discussions that you and I have. I would just summarize my little part of this by saying it's hard for me to look back at Mary Reeves, who was really a mentor. I hung out at her office. She was always keenly interested in my impressions of things. She talked about things that were still in the can, like the symphony concert. I was able to go after those and acquire them from the estate. I own a lot of things that are just exclusive to me. But when you stop and think about it, I didn't realize that I would join this little elite clique of producers of Jim Reeves. Stop and think about it. You have
Mm,
Faber Robinson, Chet Atkins, you have Anita Kerr, who, by the way, did a lot more producing than she got credit for.
yeah.
And that's one of the reasons she left Nashville. The Associated Press interviewed me when she passed away a couple of years ago. And I
Just
told that
recently. Yeah.
story and they quoted me. I was glad the word got out about that.
Mhm.
Also, Jerry Bradley produced overdubs. Bud Logan was given a lot of credit for overdubs, but according to his brother Jack, Bud handed a lot of that stuff to Jack Logan. So then you add the name Larry Jordan, and I've treated this, I always want to emphasize to fans, I've treated this as not only a great honor, but a great responsibility. I take the work that I've done with overdubbing, updating Jim's music very, very seriously, and no note gets played without my approval. I have the most terrific, about 42 pro musicians from all over the world, Nashville, Atlanta, Florida, Europe, and they all combine their talents. And I'm very proud of what we've been able to do to keep Jim's music out there. So it's been a
I've
real
listened to them.
honor.
I've listened to them. They all sound, you know, you listen to one of Larry's CDs, they sound like Jim just recorded them last week. I mean, they're incredible. They're really fan. How
I
could, by the way, if
appreciate it.
somebody was interested in buying some of the new Jim Reeves music or other artists as well from you, what website would they go to? The same one?
They could go to good music,
Okay.
good-music.biz is
Okay.
one. On the
Good-music.biz.
Shopify site, there's also a good music store online.
Okay.
It's also on
Excellent.
eBay.
All right.
If you're a foreign customer, eBay is probably the best bet because shipping is easier. But those are the things I'd recommend. We're scaling back the Amazon stuff for a number of reasons. So the sites I've listed are the best, the preferred to
Excellent.
get.
So how did you, so
Get
when did you, so you started the book and did the, was the, did the book come out the way you thought it would, or did it take twists and
Yes.
turns and it turns in your journey?
Uh, there could be a 5 hour discussion of the book
Maybe
itself
we could do that
across
in a
the record.
future, and we could do that in,
I
in our
have
next session. Yeah.
I had done about 500 taped interviews. All of my interviews are on tape. I ran tape on everybody. And a lot of this is historic because these people have passed away.
Right.
I have an answering machine tape that has a who's who of people on it.
One
And a
moment,
lot of
please.
these,
For those of you young people, an answering machine is what you may now call voicemail, and even that's just passé to you. It's just old.
we
Who
we are
uses
definitely
voicemail? But back then, we had something called an answering machine, right, Larry?
we are definitely dating ourselves. If it
Yes,
wasn't
I
already
know, I
apparent from
know.
how we look, but
That's
okay.
right.
Uh, but it's amazing the number of people that I was able to talk to, not just on the phone, but also in person. And they had just incredible stories. And everybody talked about what a gentleman Jim was. That was not a PR gimmick. He truly was a gentleman and
Okay.
very
How many
polished.
words, how many pages rather, how many pages in the hard copy of your book?
672 pages in this book.
And it's not big type, folks. It's not tiny
Yeah,
type, but these are jam-packed pages. And
yeah,
again, as I've said, the audiobook, which I want to just put this out there for the record,
yes.
it took me 4 years to record.
Right.
Okay, now not that I was recording it every day, I have other things I record, but it took a long time. And so it's 40 hours and it's jam-packed with information about Jim, like the detail you would not even expect. And I think what we'll do, Larry, in our next episode is we'll talk about how you wrote the book, who you talked to, and maybe we'll get into some of the big mysteries that you uncovered in the book,
Yes.
some of the big revelations that surprised even me. Everything from the one of the original real loves of Jim's life, who also we can argue was one of the biggest influence, possibly the biggest influence in his life, and it wasn't Mary.
A woman behind the man, and it was not Mary.
Correct. We'll talk about that and a lot of other things, just so many things. We go to,
Yeah,
the book takes us to South Africa, it takes us to Europe, it
yes.
takes us all over the world with Jim, and you feel like you're there. Um,
Well, and also I'd comment, it's
yeah.
not just about Jim. A person could read this book and find it of interest because there's a parade of who's who. I mean,
Ah,
even Patty Page is in this book. I mean, all sorts of people that
Patty
Jim
Page.
met.
I'm reading, Debbie Reynolds. I mean, there's so many people.
Right.
Jim was on a tour at one point. Tony Bennett was there. I mean, and as I'm reading this, and what's great about anything that Larry Jordan writes, or his daughter Sarah Jordan, by the way, who the Apple definitely did not fall
Sarah
far from the
Jordan
tree.
Sarah Jordan Heinz is the
Sarah
narrator.
Jordan Heinz, Heintz.
Yes.
Okay, great. Who wrote a great book on Dorothy Kilgallen, which I also narrated. Check it out. Here's the thing. Reading a book written by the Jordans by Larry is it's like Larry said, it's an adventure because you think you're reading about Jim Reeves and you are. But Jim Reeves, his life was not in a vacuum. He interacted with so many people, famous and unfamous, famous and infamous, and people we've never heard of. So Larry will take you into that. So suddenly you'll be Larry, and this is just vague, but I mean, Larry will say, Jim went on a tour but to this place with these people. And then he'll say, the thing about that tour is it dates back to the 1920s. And when these people were in it, and of these people, one of those people was this person who was a famous bootlegger. I mean, just he just goes the onion continues to get unpeeled. In fact, I'm going to confess, Larry, I love your book. But after a long day of narrating, sometimes I would get to the end of a chapter, I'm thinking it's almost over. And then Larry would just say, but wait, there's more. Here's more details. And I'm like, Larry, no, how many more details? We
Well,
learn about Jim's toupees, whether he wore them, when he didn't, if he liked to, if he
mhm.
didn't, who liked them, who didn't. I mean, there's just so much. And
Well,
Larry, I think we have to stop now because we
yeah.
were going to go 10 minutes and I knew this would happen. I think we've gone 25 minutes. And
Well,
I
I want
think,
to just quickly say
go
that
ahead.
I had input from key people like Leo Jackson, who
Yeah,
was one of the most authoritative people because Jim and Leo started with Jim when he was like 15 years old,
yeah,
and they toured the world together. And Leo was a very blunt, often profane guy with a great
yes.
sense of humor, but he would tell you the way it was. He didn't exaggerate or anything. And his input was so invaluable. And I wrote this book so that you could smell the diesel fumes of the bus, the tour
Oh,
bus.
yeah. You
It's a
really
you are
do.
there feel.
Yeah, I felt like I was there. I felt like I was living it. And and I don't say that about most books I narrate. I'm telling you, it's something. The other thing is that because Larry did so many of these interviews 20, 25, 30 years ago, some longer, so many of these folks passed away. If they were alive today, they'd be over 100 in many cases. So it's a real rich dive into history in every single chapter. And you'll hear quotes from people that we may never hear from again, in ways that we may never have heard of them. And it's just an incredible book. So, if people want to get the book, I would give you some more websites here, and we'll post them wherever we post
Right.
this video.
It's available worldwide on Amazon in printed and ebook format all over the world.
Correct. And so you can
And they can also get the audiobook there.
correct. You can download the hard copy or the ebook for your Kindle or whatever device you want to read it on, and the audiobook. And it's on Amazon, Amazon.com, obviously, or depending on your country, Amazon dot something, and also on Audible at audible.com. And so, Larry, I've really enjoyed this, and I'd say
I
another
enjoyed it.
couple of weeks we got to do this again because you're just a wealth of knowledge and so enjoyable to talk to about
I want
our
everybody to
favorite
know.
singer, Jim Reeves.
Absolutely. I want, just in closing,
Yes.
everybody to know that Frank did an excellent job. His intonation, his pronunciation, whatever the chapter was that he was reading, he adopted the appropriate mood. So it's not my voice, thank God. I have quite the allergies at the moment, kind of hoarse, but it's Frank's voice. And Frank is one of the top narrators or voice talents in the country. And I feel very honored that he did my book.
Well, thank you. You're very kind, and luckily you didn't hate my work because what are you going to do now? It's 40 hours in. Try to find someone that's going to do this 40 hours. But by the way, folks, the audiobook's already out there selling all over the world, and of course, the hard copy's been selling all over the world for a long time. So get your copy today. Go to Amazon or Audible, and we will talk to you again very, very soon. Larry, thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
Thank you. I
Take
enjoyed it.
care. All right.